Yep, still playing it, still rocking the bouncer, and still loving it after all this time. PSO2, Phantasy Star Online 2, is a game I have name-dropped in my Element Knights R2 Switch thingy review, as well as it being the sequel to a game that is honestly one of my most popular videos for reasons. I think it's a great contrasting point to Element Knights R, because in the thousands of MMOs I have played, Element Knights R is the single most inept one I have ever seen, and that's including like pre-alpha stuff that never even got to beta, whereas PSO2 is without a doubt the single best one I have ever played. So I'm kind of tipping my hand and showing my bias a little bit here. It's kind of a miracle we ever got this in North America. See, this game got released a few months ago on Xbox, and just a few days ago, at the time of this recording, just got released on Steam in North America and in English, and that's a huge deal because this game has existed in Japanese for almost a decade. So it's kind of a miracle that after all this time, this actually got released in North America at all. No one thought it was going to happen. We all thought we were going to have to keep living off fan-made English patches that we would have to keep uninstalling and reinstalling on a weekly basis. Now, I have at this point sunk about 1,200 hours into my North American profile, and I have been playing this game since launch on Japanese servers. So I'd like to think I've at least got a vague understanding about what this game is about. And because of the amount of time I've set into this, I definitely think I should talk about it and make a proper video review about it. So I'm going to do my best to do that. And here we go. I will say the version differences in time released in Japan versus that of North America is a bit of a hodgepodge and has created some development issues. For example, at launch we had the first 3 episodes of the current 6-episode game in Japan, and our first 3 episodes is like a weird hodgepodge of the first 4 episodes, but not all the features are in it, even though some are mentioned in some obscure menus somewhere. It's very, very weird, and it's affected the development a little bit, and I'll try and bring that up if I can. But that said, that's also working off my Goldfish-esque memory and a 10-year-old game, so the details on the very, very early iterations, if I have to bring them up, might be a bit fuzzy. I apologize on that. Now, the story of Phantasy Star Online 2 is really better left not talked about. I mean, it's an MMO. It's honestly surprising there's really a story at all, especially one that actually involves you, your custom-made character, as a major player. And by major player, I mean, for the most part, you kind of just show up into cutscenes and not say or do anything, for the most part. But the story itself is really not terribly well written or explained, and honestly, it's best left skipped. Originally, from what I recall, there was very little story, so what you had to do was actually find little story bits and trigger cutscenes while running around random dungeons. But now you just go to your mission person and they give you a list of every single handy-dandy cutscene in an entire episode for you to watch, back to back to back to back, and it's bad. Here, let me just give you a general approximation of what most cutscenes are in this game. Your character walks on a frame, then some other character walks into frame, says something completely random like, "I like cookies!" and then the cutscene ends. You don't really advance the plot, you don't really learn anything, and what's frustrating is on both sides of the event you have to go through load screens that are sometimes actually longer than the cutscenes themselves. And what's most frustrating about all this is it's structurally, in terms of exposition for what actually happens in the plot, very back-ended. You could skip 90% of the actual story cutscenes, not even including like the little side events to help build up character knowledge or whatever, and you could still get through the entire story up to like the last like 2 or 3 without having to see anything before that. You could skip the first 90% of all the main story bits in any chapter and still get the entire gist of it because nothing really happens until the end, and that's just awful story structure right there. So, as a public service, I'm going to do my best to, off the top of my head, give you a summarization of the first 4 episodes that are currently available in English so that you don't have to go through and actually watch all of this, and you can skip as much of it as you possibly can. You're welcome. If you actually don't want to know what the full story of this is, that's okay too. Skip ahead. That's fine. Ready? Okay, so here we go. Episode 1 features you becoming the newest member of ARCs, which is a type of, like, space police force, who's mostly out there to destroy the Foul Spawn. Foul Spawn are the minions of the Dark Falls, which were sealed away long time ago by previous ARCs members. You probably remember the name from Phantasy Star Online 1, I'm pretty sure that was a different Dark Falls. They don't really talk about that too much. Over the course of the first episode, you are basically just meeting other ARCS operatives who are going to be important in your quest, such as Zeno, who I'm pretty sure was actually the story's main character until they realized they should probably include your character in the story at some point. Affin, the proud owner of the only Australian accent in all of the ARC's fleet, including his sister for some reason. The Japanese version, he was constantly calling you XbO, so I guess the English equivalent would be mate. It was weird and it was out of place, but it kind of grew on me a little bit. You also run into Halt, your senpai, who absolutely hates you with a passion. He's going to be important in this first chapter, and then never again. Not that that's foreshadowing anything at all. You also run into Matoi, who is a girl you find on a planet who has no memory because anime, and she's going to be useless for a while, but she will be important down the line. As well as a mysterious masked guy known only as Persona. And in your pursuit of Persona, you come across multiple pieces of a broken weapon. You take them to get forged, Halt has it stolen, and then proceeds to use it to unlock the power of Dark Falls. See, apparently, as I understand it, his girlfriend was kind of killed by Dark Falls, and he wants to unleash Dark Falls to fight it so that he can get revenge. None of this is actually told through the plot of the game. As I understand, this is taught through an external anime, which is just bad storytelling. But either way, he can't fight Dark Falls and is actually absorbed by him to become the new Dark Falls known as Elder. You proceed to fight him, and because this game has to have raid fights, you don't actually defeat him and he gets away. The credits roll, and that's the end of episode 1, right? Wrong. Now we have to continue some bizarre side story about a mysterious girl you've run into a couple times, who turns out to be a pop idol who looking for her brother, who's a dragon. Don't think about it, because they're both assassins, and you have to have her kill him, and then give him a private concert. Then the credits roll once again, end of chapter. And if you're noticing this has a little bit of weird pacing, that is going to be a consistent theme through this story. Episode 2 features you following the words of advice and orders from a girl named Xion. You've actually been doing this since the beginning of the game, but she shows up so little and she tells you so little of value, I figured it wasn't worth mentioning. She's kind of like a weird AI ghost that no one else can see but you, except she's not an AI, she's a living planet the entire fleet is built around, except not many people actually know that. You run into a guy named Luther who really wants to get close to Xion in a very uncomfortable manner, and, well, not much of that goes on until the end. Moving on, there is a little bit of time travel nonsense going on because they needed to continue the plot in some bizarre direction that doesn't actually go anywhere, because predestination paradox and all time travel means that there is absolutely no stakes and everything is going to get complete anyway. Seriously, don't write time travel plots. They are terrible and they don't work unless you write some sort of MacGuffin that just says that they do, and this game already has 12 of them. Namely, mostly focusing on photons, which you're going to hear that term a lot if you actually read the story. Moving forward into the plot, you end up having to go and try and rescue Xion from Luther, in which the higher-ups of ARCS, your, once again, crazy space police force, decide that you are public enemy number 1. You team up with Matoi, everyone gets brainwashed to fight the two of you because the higher-ups are just that big idiots, and you fight through them up to this guy, who for some reason is now a different race than he was in the first chapter, because I think he was, like, genetically altered or something. I genuinely don't think they ever actually address this, but he's now insane because reasons. You find Luther, who's really gotten close to Xion, and now you have to go and fight him, who is now kind of basically invincible. You manage to defeat him kind of in the sense that you murder Xion, which drives him into a blind rage, which somehow turns him into a Dark Falls, because I guess they're not just ancient evil gods anymore. Now it's just, if you had a bad day, you can be a complete ultimate cosmic horror yourself. Awesome. You fight Luther, who's now turned into a proper Falls, and of course, because this guy needs to be a raid boss, you don't actually kill him and he gets away. Except Xion's now dead, but that has no actual bearing on the plot, even though she's kind of like the main entire AI core nucleus of your entire fleet, because she made a clone of herself. Except this clone of herself is not actually a copy of a middle-aged woman so much as it is a little boy named Zhao. Don't think about it too much. The credits roll and you're done, right? Well, no, because again, weird plot pacing. We continue the story following the backstory of Matoi a little bit, as well as trying to save Melfonsina, who was the assistant of Halt, because she is desperate to try and get him back, and then it goes into like a side story about Affin's sister, who's also a Dark Falls kind of, except she's not entirely evil, and he really wants her back, despite the fact she herself is a cosmic horror. At which point the plot basically rolls and you're done episode 2. Again, weird plot pacing. Episode 3 is a really patchwork thing in that it doesn't really know who it wants its villain to be because there's like 12 of them. Okay, so there's a new planet named Harukaton, which is kind of based on medieval Japan. It's split down the middle, half of it's light, half of it's dark. They're kind of at a war with each other. You side with the light guys, you learn that everyone on the planet's sort of based on Japanese Oni, except the princess of the light world, who's a young girl because anime. You go fight the dark guys, realize they're being controlled by another Dark Falls known as Gemini, and you lose. Which is the one thing I'll give this game, because I did not expect that. Well done, well done. Inside the stomach of this falls, you meet Luther, who kind of helps you a little bit, but stays behind because, again, he has to be a raid boss. He can't be your friend. That's just how things are. You go fight Dark Falls Gemini. You win this time, except now we've got bad news. See, you and your partner Matoi, you've absorbed too much evil by fighting evil, and now you could go evil yourselves? Kinda? I thought this was sealed cosmic horror, or you just had a bad day. Now we're including, well, you know, you stood around them too long, so now you're evil, I guess. Anyway, you are told that you are benched until they cure you of your potential future evilness. Sure, except you and Matoi choose not to because your weird Japanese princess lady needs you to fight a new cosmic horror who's not a Dark Falls. And is not powered by dark photons, but is instead just made of pure, I don't know, space Japanese evil. Seriously, this game, every time there's a new chapter, it writes like 3 new invisible super magics that this game can just use to pull out of its ass to get its writers out of any corner ever. And it's frustrating. Anyway, you and Matoi fight this new evil known as Megatz, and you win, except you've now absorbed even more evil, although it's a different brand of evil. It's like Diet Off-brand evil or something. And Matoi goes to go sulk on a planet, whereas you are very frustrated about this fact because you gotta save her before she turns evil. You run into your old pal Persona, who talks about how that was really his goal too, and in a twist worthy of M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong himself, he takes off his mask to reveal, dun dun dun, he's actually you. Except I saw that from the beginning, way to go. I mean, the name Persona kinda gave it away. Either way, you team up with Persona and you fight Matoi together, which leads them both to dying, which in turn makes you very, very angry, and you become the next Persona, because time travel plots mean that you can create alternate dimensions where nothing goes right and you have to be the evil every single time. Except you can go back into the plot and go back to where Persona asks you to help him, turn him down, say you've got a better plan than fighting Matoi. He fights you in what is a very difficult fight if you're playing hardcore mode, I know, and you decide not to get his help. So you confront Matoi and instead fight her on your own because somehow that's a better plan than fighting her together with your alternate time clone self, sure, and somehow beating her in a fight on your own is a good ending and you save her from becoming evil. And Persona's so happy about it, he becomes evil himself because, I don't know. But he becomes an even more Cthulian evil cosmic horror known as the Profound Darkness, which is apparently the source of all Dark Falls, except wait, you know, none of this makes sense. Persona's whole thing is he was already a Dark Falls, and his goal is to save Matoi, who is going to be a Falls, and as we've established, the Dark Falls, especially in the case of Elder, could last very, very long time and live together perfectly fine. And seeing as he loved Matoi, wouldn't her being turned into an immortal dark goddess thing be like victory for your dark demon god alternate counterpart? Don't think about it. Anyway, you save Matoi, Persona becomes evil, you fight him, but because this is an MMO and it needs raid bosses, you don't actually defeat him, and instead he gets sent into a temporal loop to just before he becomes the Profound Darkness to become it again, and again, and again, and again, pretty much forever existing in a permanent loop of just almost nearly dying, but not actually, and I'm starting to get some JoJo Part 5 vibes from this. You think you're done, right? Well, no, because now we have to follow a story about how Affin and his sister have now removed the evil from her, and it's manifested in the form of a little girl who's leading her to more evil. That's her real body that you have to go fight, and it's a convoluted mess that goes nowhere, but you get to shoot a giant cannon at it, so that's something. Then the credits roll proper, and you're actually done. Now, episode 4... Whoa. I'm sorry, I'm having flashbacks to episode 4. It's horrible. Episode 4 is very, very, very up itself, but here we go. So the story takes place 2 years later. You just walk out of cryosleep. They never really explain why. They say you were sort of being cured of your dark fallsiness. I guess. But they never really go into it, so canonically, Affin caught you being fresh with his sister and bopped you over the head with a lead pipe, hoping to get you frozen away forever, except it only stuck for 2 years. Joke's on you there, mate. Anyway, you are no longer a member of ARCS. I mean, you are, but you're not an ARCS operative anymore. Instead, you are now a Guardian, which makes you an ARCS operative that's outside the rules, because they've now changed the entire structure of the entire ARCS command chain. So all those assholes who were completely in control before and tried to get you and Matoi killed earlier, they're still in charge! What? Okay, fine, whatever. You get introduced to your new operator lady who, did we really need one of these? We already had 12 of them. The answer is no, we didn't. But either way, you get teamed up with a new ARCS operative named Hitsugi who's been acting a little bit weird. On your first mission together, things get a little bit dicey for Hitsugi, and he pulls out, I shit you not, a magical hologram option bar of destiny and disappears, leaving everyone thoroughly confused. See, Hitsugi is a character in Phantasy Star Online 2. You might think I'm saying that for redundancy, but I need you to understand, I'm saying that because that is an actual plot point this game is trying to get through to you. See, Hitsugi is actually played by a girl on Irath. She's now somehow pulled her avatar away, and he, now going as Al, is sleeping in her bed, completely freaking her out. You somehow jump through her computer, don't question it, and you have to fight zombies with her, because sure. Turns out in this world they have another type of space magic that completely gets the writers out of any responsibility as to actually writing a decent story, known as Ether, and she, along with anyone else playing PSO2, has the ability to control it. And a group known as the Mother Corps are trying to basically raise an army of people who can do this, because reasons that are unexplained, but they have a council of higher-ups that are basically a replacement for the Dark Falls, except we learn nothing about them. We then proceed to spend the rest of the entire episode voyeuristically sitting behind a computer, listening through her computer as her incredibly yandere girlfriend, who's definitely gonna be evil, and Al just hang out and talk about shopping and ice cream and stuff while you and your operator just hang around talking about how nothing's going on. Welcome to the plot of episode 4. I mean, the fact alone that we're going to actual Irath is definitely getting very close to Sierra Online territory of writing, such as Leisure Suit Larry 3 or Space Quest 4. On the bright side, you don't end up going to the Sega offices and becoming the head of their MMO division, writing stories about your own life. So there is that, but it's not much better. No, instead, episode 4 kind of completely erases any and all important characters that we've run into in the story altogether, because none of the other ARCS operatives are remotely at all involved in this story. Hell, for an example of a character that gets kind of completely removed from the plot entirely in episode 4, you know Matoi, she existed throughout the entire plot of this. She's kind of a big deal, even though I haven't talked too much about her. Yeah, she shows up in all of one cutscene in the entire episode, and she does literally nothing. Hell, you don't even get to interact with her at all over the course of this. It is well and truly bizarre, because they've kind of established that she's your great partner who you do everything with just because you're such a great team. This episode sucks. It is you and your operator hanging behind a computer not doing anything, whereas Hitsugi and her AI avatar counterpart just enjoy this world for a little bit, and then it turns out the people who are behind creating MMOs are villains because reasons. You rescue her a few times from all these different higher-ups who are a part of this, like, weird, super-powered human conspiracy of some sort, and then it turns out her yandere girlfriend is evil and tries to stab her a whole bunch for breaking up with her and becoming an ARCS member, kinda, sorta, but not really. She ends up in a really bad state, and Al comes by to show off that, in addition to ether, photons, dark, weird Japanese space energy, weird dark photons, falls energy, and all that other crap, he has super photons, which can heal anything. Because, again, we needed, oh goddammit, another magical, completely unwritable plot device to completely get the story writers out of any sense of responsibility for making sense of this crap. The evil Mother Corps people take away Hitsugi, leaving Al very sad, and you just left scratching your head as to why you bothered with this episode entirety. And, well, this episode doesn't really end so much as it just stops. And that is just off the top of my head, my full recollection of all the major plot points of this. You can complain that the other episodes had weird pacing in the big boss is defeated halfway through the story, and then the other half is some subplot about biker mice from Mars or something, but at least shit happened. Whereas this entire episode feels like a complete anticlimax without anything actually involving this game. This could be a whole different story about a whole different game that has nothing to do with this. I have no idea how the writers wrote this. I mean, I have no idea how the writers wrote any of this, but Episode 4 especially is by far the lowest point of the first 4, with Episode 3 probably being the best. As I said, the story to PSO2 is really best left not talked about. You can skip most of the cutscenes, and you get a bonus if you talk to the title lady. So there is that, but really just skip all this. The plot to this game is bad, and for a plot that's best left not talked about, I've been talking about it for almost half an hour straight. And I'm sure I've forgotten a lot about it because there is a lot of this that is just so pointless. It should be noted that this isn't actually where the chapter ends, but the way they released it is a little bit weird. Basically, they released like half of it, and then after that they released a little bit more and a little bit more and so on. Yeah, I don't know why they did that. I mean, at least the other chapters, for as lackluster as the storytelling was, they at least had the decency to give you the whole thing at once, whereas this one, they're giving it out piecemeal, which is a little bit peculiar, and this is still by far the worst story of the entire series, at least thus far, that's been put into English. So it's just weird, on top of just not being good, so it feels like you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, actively knowing that you're going to be disappointed, first of all because it's a plot in this game, but second of all it's a plot in what is currently the worst episode in this game, so yeah. But that's about as much as we had in terms of released content at the point of recording. And this particular video has taken so long to produce, and they're so quick to add additional little bits of each chapter, because again, they've released this piecemeal in a really weird way, that Episode 5 has already been announced, so I'm going to try and finish off Episode 4 as fast as possible. Anyway, Hitsugi gets captured and taken to the moon, we go after her, we end up going through a looping environment numerous times, because that's one of the powers of the Not Falls that we don't know anything about. We rescue her, thus making this entire, like, mini arc completely pointless because it does basically nothing, and we end up confronting Mother, who is basically Shion's pissed off sister. She's another living planet who wants to be some sort of vengeful god. You know, the really sad thing about this, too, is the fact that up to this point, the enemies were actually genuinely interesting, but up to the point where we actually end up fighting these Not Falls, they just summon Dark Falls that we've been fighting all the time, except they're blue, and why are we fighting these? We've actually had really interesting enemies like a Hydra made of subway cars. Come on! This was actually kinda cool for a lot of reasons except for the story, and now it's completely out the window. And we fight Mother in a fight that is literally a combination of the Dark Falls Elder's hands and Dark Falls Luther, which is about as boring and reused as that sounds, and then she loses. We end up teaching her the value of friendship and magic and photons and whatever, and she ends up being a good guy, only to be murdered by the leader of the anti-Mother group, which, I mean, we should probably see because that was sort of the whole point of the group. Anyway, it turns out he's evil and has basically been around forever and has been numerous philosophers over the years, apparently, and he's basically hanging around to revive an evil god, Deus Esca. At this point, we have to go fight him, fight God, because anime photons, and save the day. And, well, this entire chapter was a wash. I've said that several times during this record. I'm not sure if I'm going to even include those bits because I've had to re-edit this so many times because every couple of weeks they add a new one and this is a very long video. But, yeah, this is like the worst story bit that's very far up its own ass and very anime, but in a very generic way. And while I'm still talking about story, let's talk about the localization because it's a bit spotty. Nowhere near as bad as, you know, Element Knights are, where you'd be lucky if you actually got one sentence that made any coherent sense, and you sometimes run into complete text boxes of pure Japanese, but there are problems here and there. This game has an in-game achievement system that gives you certain achievements that are tied to certain missions, and the names of the missions don't actually match the actual names of the missions. It's usually a slight variation, but if you're looking word for that mission, you're not going to find it. Another problem is actually tied to our girl Risa here. See, this game calls her Risa, and I believe in Japanese it was actually supposed to be Lisa, but this is one of those R's and L's translate kind of weird. That's fine. But what's weird is I can't even find footage of it because I have like 200 hours of footage for this review. But I did find a text box that actually does refer to her as Lisa, so there are some inconsistencies in names and stuff, as well as voiced dialogue lines not actually saying the exact words in the text boxes. That's happened a couple times as well. And if we are talking about how kind of spotty the localization is for a minute, for the first couple months the Megats raid was available, 99% of the actual audio cue that announces it happening was in Japanese still. With the exception of the last 4 words of their entire statement, none of it was translated audibly. For some reason. That's more than a little sloppy. It's since been fixed, but it took them like a month to do it, so yeah. It's not a game breaker by any means, but it isn't super fantastic. And we've been now recording for, oh dear lord. Let's just move on to gameplay, shall we? Alright, so when you start up, you can create your own character, and this is one of the coolest features about this game, I think, is the character customization, because it is some of the most in-depth character customization I've seen in games. Starting off, you get to pick your character's species. You've got humans, which are equally bad at everything. Casts, which are the big, strong, stompy robots, Newmans, which tend to have an aptitude for magic, as well as a newcomer to the series, the Doomans, which, as far as I understand, they have an edge in dexterity, and I'll talk about dexterity in a bit, but the short version is, if you're looking for a statistical advantage, you probably won't be playing Dooman, because dexterity is useless. Now, the neat thing about this game, though, is if you're familiar with the original Phantasy Star Online, you're probably familiar with the limitations of certain character races. Okay, I'm just dancing around the topic. The original Phantasy Star Online was really cruel to casts, the big stompy robots, because I guess they were working with the logic, if you're made of metal, you can't use magic. Which, thinking about it, that's kind of racist. The short version is casts can use magic in this game. They don't get the same marginal statistical advantage towards magic that Newmans will have, but everyone can do everything about as well. The difference in ability is very negligible. But that said, unlike the previous Phantasy Star universe, which I had very little time to play, the casts don't have like the big crazy ultimate weapons. I remember them having big crazy ultimate weapons. There were also the beast guys that had like a super mode. There's nothing like that here. All the characters basically play the same. They have the same access to everything. There's just slight stat advantages that, in the grand scheme of things, are basically going to equate to nothing. Once you've decided on which race your character is going to be, you get to pick your class, more on that in a sec, and then you get to design your overall look. Starting with your clothing color, which is nice because clothing color in this game it's a frustrating thing to deal with. So being able to pick your initial clothing color, it's a freebie the game gives you. This game's got some monetization issues, we'll talk about that too. But then you get to go on to mess with the accessories. And the accessories let this game go from one level of cool to a whole other level, because every character starts out with the exact same accessories and clothing. Well, that's gender locked, but still, you can enter a room with a million different people who have all just started the game with access to the exact same stuff, and everyone will look different. When you have any sort of accessory, you can plaster it on your character, change the accessory size, change the accessory's angle, change its depth and placement. There are some limitations on it. For example, rotating things is limited to like 90 degrees one way or the other. There's no full 360 degree placement, which I find kind of frustrating, but it's very rare that'll ever come up. And messing with the size means that you can have a cast robot with a big cowboy hat, which is awesome. And if you're me, you're going to scrap that entirely to make an evil, corrupt version of everyone's favorite crazy robot space waifu. Because Risa is best girl. And in a move that seems almost impossible for an MMO, you can name your character whatever you want. There's none of this, oh, this name's already used, feel free to add 1696969 bullshit. No. You want to name your character Captain Stabs-a-Lot, and then your best friend wants to make a character called Captain Stabs-a-Lot. Congratulations, Captains. You both get the same name because Contact is tied to your personal account and not your individual character name. That means if you have a specific character name you want, take it. Nothing's stopping you. That is mind-blowing for a freaking MMORPG. Okay, so once you get into game, the main focus is running quests and doing little sub-errands to gain experience, to gain levels. Simple enough. To start a quest, you run to the quest counter, talk to the quest counter lady. I want to say her name is Rebecca. I genuinely can't remember. However, I have seen her enough times that I can tell you her dialogue box is exactly, and I quote, "Which quest are you up for?" And then you pick your quest, and there are a wide variety of quests. This isn't like most MMOs that are giant open world. It's very much like the original Phantasy Star Online, in that it uses instanced off basically dungeons, although they're outside and not necessarily dungeons per se. Usually most quests involve you killing a specific target or targets, but some simply involve collecting enough points by defeating enough enemies, as well as getting to a final area and defeating whatever final challenge meets you. Once you're into a quest, well, that's when the fun well and truly begins. Your goal? To complete the quest that was given to you. You know, obviously, but along the way there are a few interesting challenges that you will face. First and foremost are emergency codes. These are sort of mini quests that spring up semi-randomly. The thing is, they're usually random, but there are scripted ones that happen at the end of events or during them, depending on how the event is designed. And these can be very varied in their own right. Some involve you killing monsters, others involve you collecting items and placing them in specific places, others involve you running from a giant angry pitcher plant with wings that will instantly murder you. And if you're really wildly unlucky, you're gonna get a mission that drops a boss on you, and you're told to capture it instead of kill it. Except that you're told that immediately after you kill it, and I genuinely don't think anyone's actually ever done those quests well or proper, because it's just impossible and stupidly designed. Another thing to take note of that can happen during quests is what is known as PSE bursts. These are, as described in the game, kinda random. Yeah. Basically, these usually pop up when you're working with a team extra well. And these end up basically being enemies spawning on top of you endlessly for the next minute or so while you get extra experience and drops. So it's a good way to emphasize working together with more people because you have a greater chance of triggering these events. And if you happen to do extra well during these events, again, they're kind of random. Not entirely random, but there isn't a surefire way to trigger this or anything. But if you do well enough during them, you can actually extend them, potentially ad infinitum, if you happen to be working with your teams that well, which is damn near unlimited experience and money. That's pretty awesome. It's also worth mentioning EQs, or emergency quests. Although they call them UQs, urgent quests in this game. The little announcement for this thing still calls them emergency quests, so I'm still going to call them emergency quests. Emergency quests are the raids in this game. However, unlike raids in other games, they aren't simply something you can just jump into and do. I mean, yeah, you need a team, but the game will provide that for you, dropping you into a random room if you don't have one, and you typically don't need to communicate with anyone, with one exception of a defensive mission. But you can't just jump into these because these are usually timed events. They are usually pre-scheduled when they're going to happen, although some happen randomly, and sometimes players can actually force them to happen depending on certain circumstance. And these are where you get the best drops, the best loot, and have the best time fighting, well, pretty much all the major battles of the story, so you can, once again, skip the story entirely and get the best bits of the game. These are incredibly varied events and only exist for a certain period of time. But, like I said, they're varied. You've got boss fights, which are, the most of them. But you also have defensive missions, which can get really, really difficult. You have special event stuff. I streamed for an entire hour just running around the beach because it was just summer vacation, the level. There is a lot of stuff here, and it's always changing. And the schedule changes on a weekly basis, so if you don't like a couple of specific emergency quests, well, next week they're going to have a completely different pool, so if you wait a little bit, you'll find ones that you probably do like. These are almost as varied as how many different classes there are, given the fact that every single episode included a whole mess of them. So there's always going to be something here, and it's going to be highly rewarding to take part in. And once again, you don't need to necessarily be the biggest team player to enjoy these. You can pretty much play the lone wolf, again, if you're not playing a defensive mission anyway, which means that they're infinitely accessible to pretty much anyone. Now, as you're playing your game and going on your adventure, having your quests, you're going to run into what I like to call the single best thing about this game, which is the combat, because this game is damn fun. This game basically plays sort of like the original Phantasy Star Online, which was pretty remarkable for its time. You know, I've complained about MMOs endlessly about this problem, how they all want to be like WoW, where you click your enemy, and then your guy runs over and smacks the enemy with its sword over and over and over until one of the two falls over. How boring is that? And yet that's every MMO except, like, this one. This one is entirely action-based. You and your teammate could have the exact same character, could have the exact same equipment, the exact same stats, and you could do wildly different damage just based on your understanding of how to play. Combat is active. You have to actively input your attacks and special abilities. You have to use them in conjunction with one another in order to gain greater boosts than you might otherwise do, as well as, and this is a very cool feature that was in the original, it happens to have sort of a almost sort of rhythm game aspect to it. You might be able to see it a couple times while I'm attacking in game, where you might see like a little red circle surround my character. Yeah, if you attack at just that moment, you get a damage boost because you've hit like your character's special attack rhythm. That is awesome. The neat thing is though, if you're not committed to that, you can just hold down the attack button and you can do more or less fine. But because of how the rhythm works with every ability and how it's timed slightly differently and how chaining different abilities kind of changes the timing on it, there is almost an infinite depth to maximizing your character's attacks and abilities. The combat in this game is ridiculously deep, and it only gets more so when you factor in character classes. Now, characters have changed a fair bit from what I remember from like way back in the day at the start of Japanese PSO2. Now again, I'm working on kind of a ruddy memory here, but from what I remember, you had to start with a rookie class that was basically worthless, get them to level 10, and then you had to pick one of three classes: the standard melee, ranged, or magic options, and then you were stuck with them. Well, not anymore. Instead, this game gives you, from the start, access to any of the 9 main classes of the game that were released over the course of time. And as someone who has spent at least enough time to cap each class out, although I'm not good with many of them, I can at least give a brief overview with each of them. And it's important I do so, because while each character class can sort of be somewhat similar, they all fill a different combat role and they all behave completely differently. So let's start with the first 3 that came out with the original game. You have Hunters, which are your standard melee classes. They use basic weapons like swords and the less common hookshotty weapons that I really like, but they're kind of crap. These guys are awesome and they have fantastic stats, they have fantastic supports that keep people alive, especially themselves, and they are just a general great go-to for melee people. Next you have Rangers. They happen to favor rifles and attack from a distance, and they mostly specialize in using special ammo to deal special effects and take advantage of various enemies. I am clearly a melee player. The last of at least the initial 3 was the Force. These are your black mages. Their whole deal, high DPS magic attacks, and they are damn good at it. Again, I'm a melee guy, so I didn't enjoy this class too much, but they are certainly high damage glass cannons. 3 more classes, and these were interesting sort of evolutions of the existing 3, and they followed a similar pattern. You had a melee, a ranged, and a magic guy. Your melee type, the fighter. These guys were sort of like your berserker class. They're high-risk characters that do more damage the more damage they get, as well as the more status afflictions they take. I'm not a big fan of their weapon selection, though. They're a bit awkward for me. Next is the Gunner, a class that interested me so much. Best girl Dark Falls Risa is now a Gunner. This is an interesting class because it is ostensibly a ranged class. They use twin handguns, but they're designed to be close range. Their whole thing is they increase damage the closer they get to their opponents, and in addition to that, they get bonuses to avoiding attacks using bullet time dodges and being as frickin' stylish as possible. I might not be a ranged attacker, but I like these guys. The third class was the Tetcher. I'm thinking it's Tetcher. It might be Tekker, but Tekkers are the people who analyze your weapons, so we'll go with Tetcher. Tetchers are the unsung heroes of this game. They are sort of like the white mages of sorts. If you ever see anyone doing insane damage in this game, it is because of those guys, and you need to thank them because they are a godsend to anyone. They have incredible buffs, and they're not shy about sharing them. Just give the Tetchers their credit. They are freaking awesome. They introduced 2 more character classes, but unlike evolving existing character types, instead they kind of combined them a little bit. Starting with the Braver, you have sort of a samurai class. Their whole thing is attacking either with bows at a distance or katanas at close range, and they have bonuses to parrying attacks. Despite the fact that I like melee, I didn't like these guys so much. But next you have the definitive, and I'm not remotely biased in saying this, best class ever, the Bouncer. These are your red mages of sorts. They have basic spells such as healing and stat boosts, but they also have the ability to apply their magic elemental damage to their hovering rollerblades. Or if you want to play a more sensible weapon with them, they're twin swords, which are entirely based on movement mechanics. Dealing damage while you don't get hit and while you dash through attacks in the heat of battle. These guys are freaking awesome. And now we move on to the 9th and final class. And this class is very peculiar. It was introduced with episode 4, and it plays completely different than the rest. This class is the Summoner. They collect eggs and raise animals to fight for them. They can act as support characters to help those animals, but basically they just have to avoid fighting and call out special moves when they need them. It's a very quirky and different class that doesn't really fit with any of the other ones, but it's definitely an interesting experience to play as them. That is a lot of classes to work with, and they are all available to you at the start. And if you pick one and you decide you don't like it, you can swap anytime you want. It's fantastic. And, you know, you might bring up how I complained on Element Nights R about how swapping classes dropped you back to level 1 and then you had to basically start over. And you might think that might be a problem here as well, and in a way it might be, except this game adds a second slot to your class. Yeah, they went all Final Fantasy V on you, and lets you equip 2 classes at once, although you have to be at level 20 to unlock this feature. This means that you can grow 2 classes parallel to each other, so that if you don't like one, you can swap to another and not be dragged all the way back down to level 1. You can't level your subclass up to max, but you can level it pretty decently high. And your main class gets all the stat boosts and passive stat buffs of your subclass, as well as having access to their weapon proficiencies for the most part. Basically, this game wants you to have an absolute blast with your character build, and they want you to experiment, and they give you a lot of tools to allow you to do so. Yeah, having each class level individually kinda sucks, but the fact that you can grow 2 classes at once mitigates that pretty fairly, I think. And I haven't even talked about the last 3 classes, and that's mostly because they're not out in North America yet. Although, once again pointing out how patchwork this game is, there is a point where this game, through an obscure text box in your ring menu, actually mentions them. I guess in English they're called scions. I believe in the Japanese version they were called successor classes. These are super classes that are only available as rewards for playing this game a long time. You have to cap out the level of 2 individual classes, which, again, I recall being different in Japan. I think they had a bit more stuff that you had to jump through. But once you do, when these are out, you can pick these classes. And these classes are super OP. Yeah, at least they were designed that way and then got nerfed into the ground. Bear in mind, I haven't really played any of these, but based on what I can tell, the first one is Hiro, and it's going to be unlocked as of the time they're recording, about 2 weeks from now. Hiro is kind of like a mishmash between Force, Hunter, and Ranger, bringing together the magic of hitting things with swords real good, shooting things pretty decently, and getting some damaged magic out there. But it's so powerful, you can't have a subclass with this guy. And then it got nerfed into the ground, so it kind of sucks now, from what I understand. The next one is Phantom, and from what I can tell, this guy was kind of like a upgraded Braver meets Gunner. It's all about debuffing your opponent while increasing your own abilities, and taking everyone to school. Don't know a ton about this guy, but from what I hear, this particular class does sound very interesting to me. And finally, we have actually a class that is pretty much brand new. When this game launched in North America, it just came out in Japan, the Etoile, which as far as I can tell is a defensive tank version of the Bouncer, which kind of sounds lame to me. But either way, you get 3 more classes as well as a reward for just enjoying this game. And of course, each one of these would synergize with other classes, giving you almost unlimited character potential and build ideas. Another neat mechanic that actually affects your stats a little bit is your mag. This is a holdover mechanic from the original Phantasy Star Online, and when I heard it was in this game when I first played this, I was so excited. If you're not familiar, your mag is a little robot option buddy that follows you around, and you can feed them stuff so that they enhance their stats, which ultimately enhance your stats. Now, it's not as great as it sounds simply by virtue of the fact that you really only ever want to enhance your attack stats and your character's specific attack stat, because everything else is basically worthless, especially dexterity, and I haven't forgotten about that. I'm still going to talk about it at some point. In fact, let's do it right now, screw it. You want to talk about problems this game has? Dexterity is a completely 100% useless stat. I think initially it was designed to tie to critical hit rates, but I don't think that was ever actually implemented. Functionally, the only things it does is raise your bare minimum damage, so if your character's initial damage was 1 to 10 damage, with a little bit more dexterity it could be 3 to 10 damage, but the difference is negligible at best. The only other thing it lets you do is equipped armor sooner. And the thing is, your character is going to have more than enough dexterity by the end of it, so building up dexterity in your character, completely useless unless you're a braver or a bouncer, in which case slap that on your mag and you get double attack, but that's a very rare circumstance you'll run into. This game has a completely otherwise useless stat. That's not good. Then once you've fully kitted out your character with levels and stats and your mag and your equipment and your, awesome outfits and stuff, and you've done a quest, go out and do another quest and do them so much that you gain more levels. You gain the ability to level up, gain new abilities, as well as modify your character's abilities by using your subclass's abilities. Combine techniques with your character's inherent class abilities and weapon-specific abilities. There is a ton to master in terms of combat. There is damn near unlimited depth with this. It's amazing. Unfortunately, if you want to explore character build possibilities, you're probably going to have to pay money. And now we go from the best thing I think about this game, which is the character customization and combat, to what I consider the worst. Well, except for the story, of course. This game's economy is awful. And I mean that in two senses. First of all, this game is over-monetized. And the second thing is that the in-game economies are just completely messed up. So let's talk about how this game is monetized. It's a free game. You kind of expect them to monetize it in some way. I think that's fair. They have to pay for server costs and stuff, and we're not actually paying for the main game. Now, it is an MMO, so it does that classic Japanese MMO thing where there's going to be gachas for cosmetics. This kind of sucks because you do have to pay a little bit of actual money to actually take part in these. But the nice thing is most cosmetics from gacha are things you can buy from player stores, usually at an exorbitant rate, but still you can pay in-game currency for it. And that's good. What's bad though is the fact that pretty much everything else has a real-life dollar to it. Okay, so here's the thing. You can play this game completely free, and you can have an absolute blast. But if you want scratch tickets for cosmetics, that's real money. If you want the ability to trade between characters, that's real money. If you want to store more objects in your character's storage space, that's actual money you have to pay for. And the thing is, all of those things are limited. It's not like you one time buy something for more storage, which is something you'll probably need because storage in this game is kind of on the sad end. And if you happen to buy one of these passes to give you more storage, that lasts for 30 days and then you have no ability to store anything else there. It's not a one-time purchase, it all runs out. Premium account status, you can pay for that, that's $14 a month. It runs out. And that's not even the worst of it. It feels like they've locked genuinely just very simple things behind an actual paywall. Being able to trade between characters, I don't think should be something you have to pay for. Being able to store more custom-made emotes, as personally pointless as I see it, doesn't seem like a thing that should be paywalled, or at the very least should have like an in-game earnable equivalent. Being able to respec your character requires you to pay actual money. It's insane. Like, pretty much everything you can see in this game costs money. Now, I do want to stress that, again, you can play this game entirely free and have an absolute blast. I've been doing it for the greater part of a decade. And hell, while my character is pretty much 100% decked out in premium real money stuff, I have only ever spent money on one thing in this game. And that was like one of the very few things you can't buy in player stores. But the fact that you can't sell anything in a player store without paying money, the fact that everything just costs so much more, the fact that earning money is almost impossible, the fact that trading between characters is impossible unless you drop money, seems a bit much. I'm willing to understand that they need money from gacha and stuff to run servers. I'm willing to understand that they have space for premium accounts on servers if a server is full. They get premium access. Okay, fine, sure. Respecking, I don't like that, but there's just too much that feels like it's put behind an actual paywall. And this leads me to my second issue, which is the economy in this game is completely jacked up. Like, Okay, sure, you want to buy a premium item in a player store, it's going to cost an exorbitant sum of money. That's how these games work. That's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is this game has more currencies than there are stars in the sky. So let's go over all the ones I can name off the top of my head. Okay, you have Masteta. This is your in-game gold. This has been around since the original Phantasy Star. You have Arcs Cash. This is fake money that you pay real money for. Next you have Star Gems, which is a semi-premium currency. Like, you can spend your Arcs Cash on this, and you can earn very, very little of it every week by playing, but you can earn it. But it's such a small amount, it will take forever to earn anything you want with it. So I have to question why. Seriously, Star Gems don't make sense on a fundamental level when actual premium currency exists, or rather, they could have gotten rid of Arcs Cash and made Star Gems the thing and just let you earn, like, fake money that you could pay real money for in-game. That would be kind of nice, but no, of course not. They have 2 separate storefronts for both of these things, each with exclusive items you can't buy in the other, just to make it even more confusing. Let's see, what other currencies are there? There are battle coins, which are from the PvP section of the game. Now, I want to stress that there is no pay-to-win stuff in terms of combat. There might be, depending on your definition, involving like storage and trading between characters. That's an advantage people who pay money will have, but it won't affect players fighting other players. In fact, when you do that, it actually drops your character down to a non-existent class with nothing equipped, just to make it fair. I kind of appreciate that. This game does do things on a semi-sober level, but again, going back to currencies, let's see. There's also challenge coins, which you get from playing the challenge mode. You have unique weapon badges, which are items that drop. You have X cubes, which are just random rare drops that you can trade for other stuff. Astrocytes, which there are about 50 different versions of, are little crystals you can trade for weapons that aren't particularly rare, but they say they are. You have character class X cubes, which are earned by leveling up once you've passed the cap. You have rising weapon badges, which at this point are up to 1, 2, and 3 variations, and I'm pretty sure in the next week there's going to be a 4th one, and these are just given out. I don't understand these at all. Oh, that's right. And you have about 400 different types of medallions. You have Battle Pass medals, which are traded for Battle Pass stuff, which are taken to a recycle shop to trade for specific things. Oh, the English version has a Battle Pass system, by the way. Not in the Japanese version, and it actually took out a feature, the Divergent Matrix, which was kind of similar, except you didn't have to pay for it for rewards. So that's great. I'm getting really kind of upset thinking about this game's economy. And I haven't even talked about literally the billions of proprietary trade-in medals that you get from either drops, special events, just random nonsense. There is, I swear I'm missing half of them, and I haven't even talked about materials for crafting, which are basically a currency unto themselves. Oh my god, there's too much. There's just too much. And this was something I think they could have changed between the Japanese and English versions. I mean, at the start, if you want to have a premium currency, that's fine. Don't have the semi-premium, or rather make your premium the semi-premium, and just give out a little bit of that's equivalent as you play anyway. That way you can take out a secondary storefront and just have everything compiled together. Oh, and you know all those many medals I mentioned? Those are usually tied to the year you collect them as well. So if I had some 4th of July medals here from 2020, if I don't spend them, which I can't now, well, they're garbage because you can't use them in 2021. Too much economy, too much monetization. This game is awful. Now, I know at this point I have been talking for over an hour on this game, and I swear I could probably talk infinitely more about it. But I'm also sure that for someone who hasn't necessarily experienced this game, this, based on everything I've said, might be a little bit confusing and intimidating. And thinking about it, if you're just getting into this game, it absolutely is. With every patch and with every single episode they add more mechanics. They add extra functionality with certain characters, and this game gives you a lot of tutorial menus that mostly don't really tell you anything terribly useful. I mean, I said this during my Element Knights review as well, but, you know, I played this entire game in Japanese by feel, and I learned quite a fair bit. And then they dropped crafting into this world. Well, crafting, it's more like augmenting armor and weapons that you already have. And I read all the tutorial pages on this to try and understand some things, and some of my problem was things things they mention in this game just aren't implemented yet. So that could be a confusing issue with this game. But I had to actually go to someone and have them sit me down and explain to me exactly what this game was on about. Because this game does get confusing a lot with some of its basic stuff. But I want to stress, going all the way back to my initial statement, this game is fun to play. You can hop in and you can play this game with no issues. You can run around without ever mastering combat, just holding down your attack button and you'll probably do fine. You can ignore crafting, you can ignore your mag, you can ignore all the gacha elements, storage, every problem I have with this game, and have an absolute blast with a game that costs you nothing. Because this is one of the most engaging combat systems I think I've ever seen in an MMO. This game has damn near unlimited special events that occur, and it's constantly adding to them. Every 2 months we get a whole new chapter of the story that took this game 8 years to produce. The team that is bringing this game to North America are constantly giving you new content, and very, very quickly. It's legitimately impressive. And you don't have to pay a cent for it. You don't have to dig in and do anything other than just the standard quests and stuff if you don't want, and it's entirely playable in that regard. So while I would say that this game is complicated, it is also infinitely accessible to dip your toes in and figure out if you'd like it. And because this game is free, all the more reason I would encourage you to go and experience the gameplay to Phantasy Star Online 2. Now, the overall presentation to Phantasy Star Online 2 is decent, but I got a couple of hiccups I noticed with it. Overall, I think the game looks visually great. I think the character customization is fantastic. Like I said, any room filled with players, no one's gonna look the same. It's awesome. And it looks like a fun, awesome fantasy space adventure. Every world looks absolutely distinct, and all the enemies look fantastic and different depending on their environment. And one thing I like is the villain Dark Falls, all their minions actually take different aesthetic cues from them. For example, elders are usually big, beefy, hard-shelled monsters, whereas Luthers are covered in feathers. The Geminis are like toys and like carnival creatures. It's really strange. All of them are completely different, and they take cues from their masters. I love this idea. It's a very cool way to connect things aesthetically. Audio-wise, the soundtrack is pretty tremendous. If you've played the original Phantasy Star Online, you will hear remixes from that game. Whole New World was, I believe, remixed in the opening to this game, as well as the forest theme being a remix of Phantasy Star Online's forest theme. And they worked the standard Ark's Hiro theme into every boss battle during the climax, which is really, really cool. And as much as I like to dump on Episode 4 for being awful in terms of story, it had some of the best soundtrack and enemy designs until they got really lazy with their enemy designs. Episode 4 is actually really good in terms of presentation. And speaking of music, holy crap, this game actually has dedicated events to music. You get to go to in-game concerts, which actually exist on rotation. Some stuff is in-game, of course, but others involve cameos and crossovers. For example, over the summer, you got to see Persona 5 dancing stuff, where you hear a terrible dubstep rendition of Rivers in the Desert. How do you ruin Rivers in the Desert? It was the second best Persona song next to Life Will Change. You dubstep it, that's how you ruin it. But we've also had concerts featuring Hatsune Miku herself, though I don't know jack about Vocaloid, and the Japanese version actually had an honest-to-God Enka singer show up one time, along with her giant killer laser-spewing Enka robot, which made me really question why we're still bothering to hit things with swords when we have that. Photons! And if that wasn't enough, this game actually has its own in-game idol, who has her own sets and several different songs that change up periodically. Kuna, who I blame for everything wrong in the world, including the weird ending to the first episode, because someone needs to be blamed for everything wrong in the world, and it sure as hell isn't going to be Risa, because she's best girl, as established. But the point is, this game actually goes pretty far out of its way to have a pretty stellar soundtrack, and even make it interactive at times, and even make its own soundtrack and event. I mean, hell, there was a concert I went to that had a song literally dedicated to getting rare drops in Phantasy Star Online 2. That's mental, and I love it. But now we come to my issue, and it's more of a technical issue than anything. I'm playing on a standard Xbox One, and I have played this on PC, PS4, pretty much everything that Phantasy Star Online 2 is on, except the Switch, and this is the absolute worst looking way to play this game, and it's the worst playing way to play this game. MMOs are, on a fundamental level, designed to run on the weakest hardware imaginable, so that they get the biggest audience. And, well, Xbox One, at least the standard version, definitely looks like the weakest hardware. I mean, just based on some old screenshots I looked at myself, which I'm not sure I can dig up from my PS4, it looks infinitely better there, and, well, it also plays infinitely better. I mean, I could just say go play the PC version, it looks and plays better there as well, but, I mean, I could say that about literally any other game I've covered, and that's basically a redundant statement. However, here, it actually creates gameplay problems, like the Xbox One literally cannot handle a loaded room of players, to the point where I actually did an event in a very heavily loaded room on a very heavily packed server, and it was just like a standard music number you go attend a concert, and, well, everyone left about 2 minutes before I got a chance to, so I'm guessing it actually lagged out about 2 minutes. Even in a fairly loosely packed server, you can find a lot of stutter here and there, and it doesn't necessarily run at a terribly smooth frame rate. When you're basically all alone though, it plays buttery smooth, but that's under the absolute best conditions, which are pretty hard to run into. So just bear that in mind. Now, if you want a copy of Phantasy Star Online 2, well, you can play it for free. It's on Steam, it's on Xbox. If you've got a Japanese account, it's on Switch, it's on PS4, again in Japanese, and I think Microsoft holds some sort of English exclusive, so it won't be seeing an English release for a while, but it will play better there. And I highly suggest you don't do what I initially did and buy the $100 import collector's edition for the PS4. That was not my best moment, but at least I got a Rappy Pet that I never used. But on the bright side, this game is 100% free to play. Yes, it scalps money just to ask you to trade between characters and to store your crap. Yes, it asks you to pay money to respec your characters. Yes, it asks for far too much money, and it's way too confusing, and they have way too many in-game economies, but you can enjoy this game without spending a cent, as I had done so until this game came out in North America, because I just played this in Japanese for so long. The fact is, Phantasy Star Online, for me, has given me almost a decade's worth of gameplay, and I've paid basically nothing for it. And that's pretty great. This is one of the most fun MMOs I've ever played, and it's 100% free. If you think this looks good, or you like the original Phantasy Star Online, go play this because it is an absolute blast. And I can't wait to see you there.